I grew up in a small town for many years. I am talking so small that you could drive from one end to the other in around 5 minutes, give or take. It's that old cliche of everyone knowing everyone and all of their business, etc. I don't want to mention exactly where. All I will say is that I live in a European country that isn't exactly prosperous, and that's all I will say. We had lots of weird customs, lots of folklore about dark spirits, especially involving those who have passed on. This results in a lot of people in rural areas adopting strange rituals for burials and the like in order to ward these things off. I grew up on these stories. Stories of people climbing out of their graves because they were disrespected by those who buried them. Stories of people who were wronged, haunting villages and towns and driving them to ruin, making sure that crops didn't grow and that people would suffer. When I was much younger, I hung on each and every last word. I found them entertaining, although they also scared me out of my mind. I left when I was around 18 years old, and I moved to the capital of my country. And I basically left all of that in the past. All of the rituals, the folklore, the tradition. It was part of past me rather than grown-up me. I grew up and grew some sense, I guess you could say. I thought of the people that I grew up with as people stuck in the past who like to fearmonger. A few years ago, I actually went back. I never intended to go back for anything more than a few family visits for the odd day, here and there. The reason that I went back is because, well, my uncle actually passed away. My mother asked me if I could come along and help settle some things at his place, since I was the only one with flexible work at the time. His wife and his kids, they were still grieving, so it was best for someone else to handle all of those things, rather than stressing them out even more when someone close to them had just died. I went down sometime around October, a few years ago now. The town did not look like it had changed at all. The same shitty, dilapidated houses, the same messed up roads, the same crumbling school. It was a quiet place. Even though everyone knew everything about each other, people at least tried to pretend that they liked to mind their own business. So I was sitting in a diner, probably the second morning that I was there. I was just trying to clear my head and get some space from everything going on. These two older men were talking pretty loudly about a funeral that had happened earlier this week. They clearly didn't really care who heard them. One of them made a comment that really threw me off. Something about a second burial. The other guy that he was talking to just started shaking his head back and forth and telling him to quiet down, like it was a normal thing, but that he shouldn't really be saying it out loud for other people to hear. I remember asking the waitress because I was confused and also intrigued at the same time. Some of these people I still recognize from when I was a kid, although not all of them recognize me. She kinda gave me a look, hesitated, and then told me that the town had been having bad fortune. I pressed her on that and asked what kind of bad fortune, and the face that she made, well, it was sour. She clearly did not even want to think about it. She told me that someone had messed up a funeral service. She told me that a few years ago, one of the family members had gotten drunk. He had taken a leak during the service and ended up falling into the grave before it was even covered up. She told me that since that day, that sometimes people have been coming back. She said that the town had been cursed and that they had to rebury the dead. She didn't laugh, even once. I shook my head in disbelief and told her I was not a kid anymore. She didn't even get angry at me. She just told me that I would understand if I stuck around. The whole interaction just threw me for a loop and didn't really ease the stress I was feeling around my uncle's burial. So, this next event that I want to tell you about, it happened around 4 days after my uncle was lowered into the ground. I wasn't even the first one to see it. There was an entire crowd gathered around the dinky little bar that everyone congregated around. My uncle, he died from a heart attack. That's how they described it to me anyway. He had been working on something in this makeshift garage he had constructed himself. My aunt rushed outside when she heard him screaming. She found him writhing on the floor, clutching his chest, ranting and raving about something in the trees. He had blood around his nose, and he passed out before she could even get help. What little medical people we had in our town declared it as a heart attack, and that was that. But right there, standing in the middle of the street, it was my uncle. I had seen his pale, dead face in that coffin. I helped arrange the flowers. I helped carry his wooden coffin. I saw him lowered into the ground. I helped nail the cross into the dirt as his headstone. But now he was standing right there, right in front of me. His clothes were all dirty and torn in places. Pieces of fabric just completely ripped and exposing his flesh. These were not the clothes that he was buried in. These were clothes that were from his house. He was pale, the same pale that I saw when he was buried, a deathly pale, almost gray. I just watched as he kept walking up to the front door of a small house just down from the bar. It was my aunt's house, his house. He kept pounding on the door so hard it looked like it was going to splinter and break. I could hear my aunt inside. The walls were thin in most of the houses. I could hear her crying. I could hear their daughter crying. She was screaming at him to just stay dead and give them peace. Her daughter was screaming, saying, "Why does Daddy look like that?" My uncle, he just kept trying to talk to her like nothing had happened. He kept calling my aunt's name and telling her to open up the door. He kept on telling her that he was cold and that he needed to come inside before he froze to death. At first I felt really sad. He sounded so confused and scared, but he kept repeating the same words again and again on a loop, until his voice was becoming hoarse and he sounded less and less like himself every time he said them, until eventually he was screaming them and he sounded angry and really not like himself. He wasn't the type to get angry, especially not so fast. I was just stuck to the spot, and I did not feel like I could move even a muscle. One of the bigger guys in the town, he approached him, and that is when things became violent. The man had not even fully reached my uncle. He was still a step or two away from him, and about to reach out for his arm. But before he could, my uncle spun around at lightning speed, faster than this guy could even react. My uncle grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the side of a parked car that was nearby. He slammed him so hard, you could hear the audible thunk of metal and the sound of something cracking. The guy that he slammed screamed, and everyone started to take a step back. My uncle was now facing everyone, shouting and screaming, but it was the exact same words as he was shouting to my aunt, like he was on a loop. Only his voice sounded deeper and more hoarse now, and like something else. He was waving his arms around and he had this look in his eye, or rather, he had no look in his eye. The look in his eyes, his facial expression, they were all blank. They did not match how angry he sounded or how violently he was flailing around. A stone-faced man who sounded like he was shaking with anger. It looked uncanny, to say the least. One thing I remember from staring at his face for so long in that moment was the skin on his face, especially around the lips. It looked to be flaking off and tearing in places, and you could see how red it had become. Skin on every part of his face was peeling off, like he was badly sunburned. At this point, 4 or 5 men from the town rushed my uncle down at the same time. My uncle continued to fight back. One guy put his hands around my uncle's throat, and my uncle, he just bit down really hard. I heard the scream. I saw the blood pouring from the guy's hand. In the blink of an eye, the man was on the floor. My uncle had all of his weight pressed on top of this man, and I saw him bite down again. He bit his face, his nose it looked like. The other men had to wrestle him off, and it took all of their strength just to pin him down. I just stayed back. Even though he was my uncle, I could not bring myself to do anything. I probably just would have gotten in the way anyway. They managed to restrain him. They tied his wrists with rope and forced him to the back of a pickup truck. My uncle did not stop, not even once. He was trying to bite, to wrestle, to kick, to drag his heels. He did this the whole way. Not once did he tire. And while he was being dragged away, he was still shouting those same words, as if he was talking to my aunt. By the time he was being driven away, he started to sound more desperate than angry, and he was asking other things now. He started asking random questions that didn't really make sense at the time, asking whether the dog was still alive, if his daughter was still going to school, what time she'd be leaving in the morning. It didn't sound like a concerned husband anymore. And with that, the men continued to hold him down and drove him away. They drove him in the direction of the graveyard. I asked what would happen to him. One of the elders in the town told me, and he didn't even seem shocked or shaken by the events he just witnessed. He just told me very matter-of-factly that he will be checked, is the word that he used, before being reburied. He told me where to find them. He said that I would be welcome to observe if I told the men my relation. I was hesitant, but at this point, morbid curiosity had gotten a hold of me. I didn't want to believe what I just saw, but I just had to know. So I headed down there, and the men let me watch. My uncle was tied down to a chair. This was hours later, and he was still fighting with the same amount of energy. One of the men took me with him to the graveyard. We dug up my uncle's grave right then and there. The wooden coffin was still present. When we opened it up, I expected to see nothing there. But my uncle's body, it was still there, just the same as we had buried it. I asked the man what the hell was going on, and he told me that this was the curse. He told me that they do not tell ordinary folk the second part. He told me it was better that they believed that the bodies had come back because of an evil spirit possessing it. After that, the man took me back, and they started preparing another coffin. None of them seemed panicked or confused by the situation. My uncle was asleep by this point. I didn't think he would ever tire out. They began to lift him from the chair, and he woke up when they did. And he started to cry. He started to wail and beg them to help him. He kept insisting that there had been some kind of mistake, and that he had simply gotten lost in the woods after leaving his house. He begged through tears for them to not put him back down there again. He kept on saying that he didn't want to go back. When the men carried my uncle toward the coffin and began to place him, he dropped the act. He started to thrash and try to fight back again. Started screaming all sorts of horrible things at these men, telling them how he was going to kill them, how he was going to come back and kill them, telling them all the horrible things he would do to their family. He kept on thrashing and trying to fight back, but his hands and legs were still tied, so it was impossible now. They forced him down into the coffin, and the men kept slapping my uncle in the face. One actually got a shovel and kept beating him across the head to stop him from trying to escape. Before long, he was bleeding. The blood looked darker than I'd ever seen blood look before. It looked thick too, more like a kind of jelly than actual blood. This happened until eventually, my uncle was not moving anymore. While they were beating him, my uncle, if you could still refer to him as that, shouted one last thing that really stuck in my brain. He begged them. He said, "Please, you have to give me more time." He said if they gave him more time, he would fix his mistakes. I have no idea what that meant. The men carried the coffin out to a different section of the cemetery and buried my uncle in an unmarked grave. No cross this time. The rows, they weren't even, but there were a number of them. Probably 3 or 4 of them, not including my uncle. They lowered my uncle down, said some kind of a short prayer that I did not understand, and then quickly covered him up. And that was the end of that. Once it was done, no one would talk about it anymore. Not those men, not the other people in the town, and especially not my aunt. She became furious with me when I tried to mention it. She told me that I should know better, that my uncle needed to rest, and that no more words need to be said about it. And that was it. I did not stick around much longer, because I was scared and I really did not understand. I felt like more of an outsider than I ever had before in my entire life. I'm only typing this here to just get it out of my head, because to this day, I have no idea what I witnessed or why. If it really was a curse or something else, I don't think I will ever know. I have not been man enough to go back there ever since. 3 friends and I hiked the Heart Lake Trail in Yellowstone 2 summers ago. If you've ever been to Heart Lake, you know it's one of the more remote areas in the lower 48, around 11 miles away from the closest road. This was not our first foray into grizzly country, for multiple overnight trips, but that aspect of backpacking in Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho never truly loses its fear factor. If you know, you know. Anyway, what spooked the hell out of us that night had nothing to do with brown bears. While we were chilling by our campfire, I distinctly remember we were talking about our upcoming Teton Crest Trail hike later that week. It was around 10:30 p.m. Suddenly, we saw a faint light across the lake, almost directly across from where we were on the opposite shore. As we pondered whether or not anyone could be possibly night hiking to Heart Lake, it slowly started to get brighter and brighter, essentially no longer at headlamp levels. If you know that lake, it's pretty huge. We passed by only around 4 people that day, and every single one of them were CDT hikers headed north, the other way. There was essentially no one around but us, and we had that lake all to ourselves as far as we knew. One of the more unsettling thoughts going around that campfire was that we knew that no one would have been showing up to that shoreline across the lake at that time of night, and if they were insane. That area is full of bears, and there is no chance that anyone would willingly hike that remote trail in pitch darkness, even if they got a late start. It's not a trail that you could get turned around on or lost on, so the only way that you would ever arrive that late is if you night hiked there willingly. As we were nervously clamoring to figure out what the hell it could be, the light began moving towards us, albeit pretty slowly. It was slow enough that it made us question if it was a trick of perception, but fast enough to make that super unlikely, especially when all 4 of us conferred on that fact. And we knew it was extremely unlikely. We didn't even need to say it, though we eventually did. But the creepiest part, by far, was that when it became clear that it had to be moving towards us, the moment when it was no longer a question. And the reason we knew it was no longer a question is that it was definitely moving over the lake. And, as I said, that lake is big. Now, there is only one explanation for that. It was either a boat of some kind, or something that was flying across the lake extremely low, and extremely slow for an aircraft. Problem with that is, the only way to get a boat to that lake would be to fly one in with a helicopter and drop it down. Obviously, that did not happen, and this light was way too bright and moving way too fast to be some kind of lightweight pack raft that was hauled in. Beyond that, no one could have rowed that fast, and we already knew that no one would have arrived at that shoreline at that time. Just when it got to the point that we were certain that what we were seeing was not possible, just about when it seemed like the light had been traveling over that lake's surface for what seemed like a quarter mile, the light just winked out, gone, never to reappear. I can assure you, During every part of that trip prior, grizzlies were the #1 concern on everyone's mind, being that deep into the backcountry, sleeping overnight at that particular campground, right at the base of Mount Sheridan slopes, and on top of a prime water source. I can promise you this, no one had grizzlies on the brain when they were trying to get sleep in their tents that night. What made it worse is that when we hiked back out the next morning, the only footprints we saw along the shoreline across the lake, where the light had originated from, were the ones that we had left the day before. Still not nearly creepy enough to keep me out of Yellowstone's backcountry. Do any of you guys know anything about Tampico? I lived there for a year and some weird shit went down. Also, possible serial killers? I would like an explanation. I was followed home once by a car with 3 men. I got a pretty good lead on them at one point and managed to keep it up until I got home. Upon arriving home, I scrambled to the nearest firearm. By the time I got outside, the car had pulled up and the people inside were getting out a little farther down the road. I fired 3 warning shots and they dipped. Yeah, dude, I've been out to Tampico. One of my buddies used to be involved with the old mission down Offenham Road. If you get out there, you start getting into woods people, rednecks and tweakers, so that does not surprise me. I would be packing all of the time if I lived out there lol. They could have been tweakers. Although, a bunch of my friends claim that like a decade ago, the cops found an old woman with her face blown off up near Teton. It's way north of Tampico, but it's about the same distance west from Yakima. And for the serial killer thing, when I worked at the Herald, my editor told me about a string of bodies turning up on the res a couple decades ago, but since it's tribal police, they either didn't investigate or chose not to, so they never found out if they were related at all. Reservation cops are weird. They don't have to talk with anyone if they don't want to. Some guy shut up one of their tribal buildings one time, and the feds were instantly there. And all the info that we could get is that bullet holes appeared in the building overnight. They would not even confirm that there was a shooter when there was. It's like a black hole. Also, elaboration on Catman and a story. Our story begins in the year 1999, when my Uncle Bob, his wife, and 2 children moved from Union Gap to Tampico, Yakima, WA. Nothing specific in the beginning was ever brought to any of our attention, but it was known that the area was strange. I was pretty young at the time, 8 years old, so there's not a lot I remember outside of the event of which I will speak. The event in which I speak is our dealing with what was dubbed the Catman. There was an oasis up the road, around the corner and down some more. The oasis was surrounded by the thickest brush imaginable. To this day, I've never seen anything like it. Cows would go missing, like the entire cow, and bits and pieces would appear around the pond, as well as a great many of her bones, bits of clothing, etc. But these cow and horse parts would sometimes be as far as 1.5 miles away from their pastures where they disappeared from. For those not aware, cougars will only drag prey a few hundred meters away tops before feasting and leaving what is left for predators. Anyhow, it had been long known that this area was evil. Immigrants working in the fields would go missing with no trace, and no search as to the nature of the non-existence in this country officially, so for all I know, those could have just been rumors. Getting to the bread and butter, my older brother and our 4 cousins all heard about this thing, and one night, we decided to perform a community service and go and kill this thing. My older cousins were about 16 years old on the average, so we were not granted permission to take any firearms. Instead, we bolted butcher knives to axe handles and made these spear-like things. I was pretty young, and I wanted to go, so my Uncle Bob came along and brought a sidearm as well. Like someone said, just wandering around Tampico unarmed is not advised. We walk out to this place, and as we approach the oasis, there is this massive temperature drop. I'm talking like 20 degrees. About 20 meters before the fence surrounding the oasis, and my uncle orders me to stay back. He allows the older ones to approach. I suppose he feels like they can handle themselves. Gary, Jake, and Thomas, the older three, they cross the fence and approach the wall of thicket and jungle. I mean, a linebacker could not tackle his way through that shit. It would take several hours with a large saw to get into it. The other two, my brother and my cousin Andy, they stayed on the road. Right as the elder three got to the tree line, we heard what sounded like a tornado blowing through the trees. The wall of brush opened up a gap 8 feet tall by 4 feet wide or so. We had no lights, so there was only shadow. My uncle shouted run, and he picked me up and ran with me underneath his arm, a mile back to the house. Before the elder three cousins broke and ran, Thomas and Jake threw their makeshift spears and stuck the thing. To add to your initial thing, OP, a close friend of mine disappeared a little over 10 years ago. A few days later, there were 3 bodies found on different parts of the reservation. Reports said that they had all been tied up, shot in the back of the head, and burned. We were worried for a couple weeks that he was one of them. The DNA came back negative. We found his body dumped in eastern Oregon a year or 2 back now. I have a decent Batsquatch story. I saw it in Ape Caves near Mount St. Helens. I am from Seattle. I was hiking with 2 friends, my girlfriend and her friend. Me, being a commando, I had my Kimber 1911 in .45 on me. Me and one of my friends are former Boy Scouts, so we knew how to prepare for shit. Ape Caves is an 8-mile long stretch of giant-ass caves. We all had headlamps and flashlights. My girl had my lantern. We were probably around 2 miles in when we hear several loud, inhuman screeches. The cave is pretty damn cold year-round, and this was in the middle of January, so it was extra cold. We had the whole place to ourselves. Whatever made that sound, it was not another human. We were all scared shitless. We all had our knives out. I held back on pulling my gun, because I was not entirely sure if we were about to get brutally murdered or not. Then my friend pointed out something moving on top of the cave. It was just hanging there like a cocoon. I saw red, piercing eyes glowing from our lights. It spread its wings and violently flapped down in front of us. Then we just panicked. Everyone but me ran away screaming, tripping and falling at some point, all while I screamed a variety of curse words trying to draw my pistol. The thing lunged towards me right as I opened fire. Only 2 of the 4 rounds that I fired actually hit this thing, because I was in straight up panic mode. I ducked. It went right over me and just kept going. I fell down backwards and tried to hit it more, but it pulled up too quick for me to shoot. It looked pretty injured though. I hurried up to catch up with the rest of the group and picked up a few of their dropped knives along the way. I saw my girlfriend's lantern just up ahead, all shattered. I thought that maybe she fell. I got a closer look, ready to pick her up or do whatever I had to do, but she was not there. I collapsed and started losing my shit. I had my gun out, calling her name, but got no response. Just that same terrifying screech. I was sitting there alone, listening and wondering what the hell to do. I wasn't sure if my friends got out alive or not. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to find out. I was almost ready to take my own life when I realized that no matter what happened, I was not going to let myself die in there. At this point, it was a battle. If anyone is getting out, it's gonna be me. I probably shouldn't have stuck around, but it came after me again. This time, it came from the side. It tried to land a few feet in front of me, but I emptied the 3 rounds in my mag on it. This time, all 3 hit. It was knocked on the ground, squirming and squealing. I was too shaken up to do anything, but it managed to fly back upwards. In a few minutes, I decided to pop in my only spare mag and keep on moving, this time more cautiously. I wanted to shout for my friends, but I did not think it would be a good idea. I kept thinking that I heard them, but I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I knew that the screeching was sounding more painful each and every minute. I hoped I killed it. The tunnel started to get a little bit warmer and a little bit brighter, because I was almost at the end of the cave. I heard my friend call my name, and I managed to call his back. I was home free at that point. I got up there, and they were mostly okay. One of my friends broke his hand, and my girl's friend got a minor concussion. Other than that, just a few scrapes and bruises. They said they heard my gunshots and didn't think I made it. We got the injured people to Harborview ASAP. Afterwards, we debated whether or not to tell how it all happened. I didn't want to end up in a madhouse. We were not sure if I killed it, but we did not want to go back and find out. This place is still somehow a tourist attraction. I never heard anything about a giant man-bat hybrid. I heard rumors that people have seen glowing eyes in there though.